session, as Tom mentioned, is going to be about header bidding, topic of the year, 2016. A year ago at this time, we would have been asking ourselves questions like, what is header bidding? How does it work? Will I make more money? What are the risks? Well, needless to say, I think we all know a lot has changed in the last year. And so we now have a whole new set of challenges and opportunities and questions that the industry is throwing at us and that we're throwing at ourselves that we've really got to tackle to see where things go from here. So who better to help us with these exciting questions than our distinguished panel of experts, starting with Rachael Savage from the New York Times. She's VP of Ad Ops and Placements. Rachel's dad is in the audience. Say hi, Dad. Where's Dad? Hi, Dad.
Hi,
awesome.
Dad.
Never done that before. That's fantastic.
It's awesome.
We have Jason White, CBSI GM and VP of Digital Revenue. Fun fact about Jason, he sold his car 2 years ago, lives in San Francisco, but sold his car 2 years ago, now bikes and ferries to work, and lost something like 20 pounds in 2 years doing that. Yeah. So saved the environment, lost 20 pounds.
Exactly.
Knows a ton about header bidding. Amazing. We have Gabriel Weintraub, AppNexus' very own chief economist. Gabriel claims that he became a professor at Stanford because he wasn't able to reach the upper echelon of professional soccer, which he would probably call football. If you're wondering why we have a chief economist here, we're going to get into that a little bit later. You'll find out. And then last but not least, we have Tim Wolfe, USA Today Network VP of Revenue Operations. Tim grew up owning a dairy farm and raising pigs, apparently, which, again, right to header bidding makes perfect sense. So, before we get into the tough questions, I wanted to do a fairly quick kind of lightning round to get the juices flowing. What's one thing that's been surprising upside in the last year? What's one thing that's amazing that we didn't expect about header bidding? And what's one thing that's been surprisingly disappointing? Let's start with you, Rachael.
I would say the good thing, it's been fun to watch the deals that are coming in from programmatic and highly custom placements. So we're working with brands on both ends of the spectrum, which is exciting to see. I would say the bad thing, I won't say it's a bad thing, it's a hard thing, is keeping up and making sure that when they're coming in, it just changes the way we sell and how we respond to that and look at the mix. As Tom mentioned earlier, it's tricky. It's
overwhelming almost.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. What about you, Jason?
The unique demand and the yield, bar none, have been the big upside that we've seen. We talked about this last year on this panel when we first started doing it. But we've seen that maintain, and the unique opportunities from each platform to bring in audience-based demand that you guys are going out and sourcing has been great. The challenge has been, integrating in other partners, and some are easier to integrate in with others. Some have higher latency, and kind of working through that system has been, a bit of a challenge, but
gotcha.
All good.
Fantastic, Gabriel.
Yeah. So as Ryan mentioned, I'm a professor at Stanford. I studied marketplaces, and a precondition for marketplaces to work is to have thickness. So we have many participants that come together to interact and trade. And I think header bidding is just like a beautiful thing because it's exactly doing that. It's increasing liquidity, increasing thickness by bringing new demand sources that, to make transactions that weren't available for them otherwise. That's what I love about header bidding. Now, to get this, to fulfill this promise, I think the details, the implementation details really matter. And there are some details that I'm not that happy about, and one of them is the auction logic that maybe we'll talk a bit more later on.
So header bidding is beautiful. I think that's a hashtag. We can introduce that. Lots of talk about complexity. What about you, Tim?
I think the best thing has been getting rid of and not having to deal with manually optimizing daisy chains. I think that effort in and of itself was too laborious and too much human intervention. I think with header bidding, to the point said earlier, that the efficiency brought to the table with it has just been the tremendous opportunity, the lack of latency, and also the lack of waste associated with what was the ecosystem before.
Gotcha. So Gabriel mentioned auction dynamics. Before I ask you about that, I want to hear from others. A year ago, 2 years ago, programmatic was second price. It was just a de facto assumption. Everything was second price, not too dissimilar from search. Header bidding has introduced, I think, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions about auction dynamics. Is it first price? Is it second price? What's it supposed to be? Who's doing what? Do we actually know what's happening? I'm curious, for instance, Jason.
Well, I think
what do you think it's supposed to be?
Yeah, I think it allows us to have a conversation about it now.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was kind of one of those great, like, shh, don't talk about it. But, when I've talked with buyers and, I kind of expose the bid landscape and what we've seen happening, like over the past 3 or 4 years, it's this perpetual race to the bottom, where you have like a lion's share of performance advertisers that are kind of setting that second price. But, you have all these retargeting dollars where we saw like $200 CPMs. We don't want the $200 CPM per se, but I wouldn't mind 10. But we're selling that for $1 and a penny.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, when you have a conversation with buyers, they kind of go, well, that's not fair. Like, exactly. That's why we need to have, geniuses like Gabriel to help us, because we can't do it ourselves. We've tried. But it's that, that analogy of, the buyer had the bazooka and we were sitting there with a knife where it was like, oh, we can set floors by brand.
Yep.
And it just doesn't scale. So we need, we need help and we need machines to help us there.
Machines and geniuses.
Yeah.
So, Gabriel, take us to school a little bit. How should things work?
Okay, so first let me just step back. And so my view is that header bidding, because it helps identifying the demand source that values each impression the most, can actually increase the size of the total pie. And that's important because by doing that, we may be able to benefit, publishers by improving monetization, but also advertisers, like both sides of the market. At the same time, I do believe that to accomplish this, the auction logic is key, like to get this right. So let me just elaborate a little bit on what are kind of desirable characteristics of auction logic. So first, we want header bids that are competitive with AdX bids, that can compete head-to-head with AdX. And typically, in the current system, that doesn't necessarily happen because each SSP is running a second price auction, and we're often sending significantly price-reduced bids.
So the playing field isn't really level right now with
right.
AdX and second price header bidding.
Right.
Got it.
That's the first point. Second point, going back to one of the points Tom made, we want an auction logic that I think is fair and transparent for buyers so that they feel safe expressing their true valuations. And third, we want, of course, and very importantly, an auction logic that monetizes well publishers' inventory, something that achieves significant bid density and maybe has other protection mechanisms such as hard floors.
Gotcha.
And I think this is particularly important because we cannot just run a second price auction in DFP. DFP is not set up that way. And so at AppNexus, actually, we've been thinking pretty seriously and intensely about this. And we came up with a new proposal for a new auction logic for header bid auctions that we think addresses all the challenges above. And
awesome.
we don't have time I don't have time to discuss all the details, but just to give you the headlines, kind of the main idea is we think that the header wrapper should collect first and second highest bids from each SSP.
Interesting.
And then from all collected bids, we should run a second price style auction to decide what's the winning bid that's going to the FP, and also what's the payment from the winner.
Gotcha.
And we think this type of auction could benefit all stakeholders. And again, I don't have time to go into the details, but I'll be happy to talk more.
Sounds like a lot of really interesting thinking going on. Excited to see a concrete proposal coming out of that. It seems like an area where I'm hearing everyone really wants to do right by buyers, which I think we all agree. If we don't do that, it's a short-term, maybe short-term gains, long-term losses. We need a lot more transparency, and we need to explore some improvements to how things are working today. So that's awesome. Another really interesting question that came a little bit out of nowhere once header bidding adoption really started taking hold late last year was this concept of server-side header bidding or server-side pre-bid. That's something that we're hearing a lot about in the market. It's a little bit confusing. What is it? How does it work? Who's looking at that today? Who's found success with it? Who can talk a little bit about how that's working for them?
Rachael.
Take it.
Take it away.
We introduced our header bidder, I would say late last year, and I think performance and latency was a big concern for our web team's technology. So we moved to the server-to-server integration, and it just sort of leapfrogged those concerns over putting more and more partners on the page. So that's why we went there. And
Awesome.
I think we continue to measure it and see how that's working for us, but so far so good.
So improvements on UX, it's been overall, sounds like a profitable endeavor. Feeling good about how that's working, worth exploring more.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's something
Great.
that we could probably continue to evolve and work on, but to introduce header bidding on the site, we went that way, and we're not getting too many complaints.
Gotcha.
So far,
So working for the New York Times tells me there's some chance that it will work for other publishers, potentially. Great to hear. Similar topic, something that's coming up in kind of pockets, but doesn't seem to be well understood. Header bidding for other formats, non-desktop display, non-mobile web. Header bidding for video and mobile.
Yeah.
What are people hearing?
I mean, we would love to test it. I think that it's the natural evolution. We would probably, in video, most of our full episode stuff is sold, directly and in an upfront fashion. But the outstream stuff that we're, integrating across our sites, we see that as being a good opportunity there.
Tim?
Same for us. I mean,
Yeah.
from the perspective of it's something that's very interesting. We have had one or two partners approach us about trying to do this with video specifically, not so much with mobile at this point, but ideally as more and more of our traffic moves to mobile, we'd love to find a analogous or similar solution on that platform as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and like other formats like native, I think are going to be more challenged. I think there's some nuances that need to be ironed out there, like the CSS formats and stuff like that. I don't think it'll be as plug and play, but kind of watch that space because I think that's the next one that'll go.
Gotcha. It sounds like it's worth exploring. We talked a little bit about some of the work New York Times is doing with native. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So I agree entirely that it's a little bit of a hurdle to get behind what native is and defining that. So at the Times, we've explored native ad units to sort of replace display ads on the website and mobile sites. And that's taking the form and function of the storytelling the New York Times is known for. So if you're reading an article about Fashion Week and you have slideshows or videos as a card, let's use that presentation for a marketer and the ads they run. I would love to do that programmatically. And so we've been exploring this with Google and their DFP native product. They're not entirely there to do it programmatically yet, but we're sort of working in lockstep because I think taking those components and being able to render them the way we want to, it's a good performance conversation with a marketer and good for us too.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm hearing lots of really interesting things about header bidding enabling not just new formats, but really premium demand. Again, I don't think that was really probably the original promise, but you mentioned something else that I want to come back to, Google. So, they've announced exchange bidding dynamic allocation, EBDA, as a response to all of the excitement and activity going on in header bidding. And my perception is there's a lot of sort of intrigue and questions and maybe a little bit of uncertainty about what it is, how it works, how transparent it is, et cetera. You probably know a heck of a lot more about it than I do. So I'm curious, for any of you, what are you hearing? How are you approaching it? How are you thinking about it?
So from our perspective right now, we're approaching it with extreme caution, frankly. I think everything that we've tried to build internally is around transparency and allowing everyone to compete, even with our direct sold type of opportunities. So to have these kind of black box scenarios potentially exist, it is not necessarily something that's comfortable for us. We've seen success with header bidding. We've seen success in allowing enhanced dynamic allocation and some other tools inside of the ad server force all of our direct and indirect demand to compete. So it's not something, from that perspective though, it's something that we're looking at potentially as a portfolio. So maybe some header bidder partners that aren't performing it quite well for you, maybe this is a place to potentially, I say, demote them to or promote them from, but a place that...
Demoted to EBDA.
I don't want to say demote per se, but or promote from, but I mean, versus going through the effort of getting script on page, whether it's direct or through a wrapper, but just trying to maybe integrate, but with a lot less risk associated. So.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that we finally democratized the ad server, right, with header bidding, and I think it'll be hard for most publishers, not to speak on behalf of all publishers, but CBS, we're a large publisher. I think it'd be hard to kind of go back to putting all of our eggs in one basket.
Gotcha. Rachel?
You got it.
Gabriel?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reinforce what was just said. So first, when you start looking at these allocation algorithms, they're very complex. So it's not a surprise that they look like a black box, because there's a lot of complexity there. So I completely agree with that, the lack of transparency. And I think the broader point is what Jason mentioned is, do you want to have like one provider controlling like all your inventory? I mean, when we think about healthy markets, we want to have options, we want to have competition. I think when you're like, I don't know, like hiring a cable service, do you want to deal with a monopolist or you want to deal with like few options? And the answer is pretty obvious. And I think this is the same thing. So I think it's very important. I strongly believe that it's very important that in this market there's competition, there are options, so that we can deliver value for publishers.
Fantastic. Really, really interesting feedback. I like the democratizing the ad server concept. I think that's a big concept. Myself as a publisher, our work at AppNexus, we're definitely headed in that direction. Another thing that we talked a little bit about in prep that I thought was super interesting is this whole category of sort of unintended, at least unintended by me, upside that we're finding in the richness of the data that's coming out of header bidding. The promise of header bidding was really about revenue initially and driving more competition. But, again, unintended excellent consequence is just having a lot more data to work with about our buyers. Can you all talk a little bit about what you're seeing there, how you're using that, what the benefits are?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we've viewed the world as, the asymmetrical, buyers got, all of the data insights, and we've kind of become this blank canvas on our end. And we have the ability to work with floors, and partners like AppNexus are making great waves to come up with algorithms to help us in that regard. But I think as you start to see more demand evolve into audience futures or audience guarantees, I think one of the things we'd like to do is get to know more about our audience as it relates to that, so that we can transact on it fairly. We right now know a lot about content, context, and how to forecast that. Tom was talking about evolving into the audience world. I think partnering with partners like AppNexus who grok that is going to be critically important for publishers, because the only way that we can have a fair and balanced marketplace is if both players have equal access to information.
Yeah, so I mean, just to kind of re-emphasize that point, I think currently we have at AppNexus an amazing data science team that uses all sorts of data to do things like dynamic hard floors, all those amazing things, and all this new data that is coming in, I think will just reinforce that effort, and we're trying to find ways on how to use this data to even like further improve your monetization, publishers' monetization. So I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's the potential to even develop new ad products based on the signal that we get. Really seeing true willingness to pay across all of your inventory gives you some insights about what you were never seeing before in terms of particular categories of programmatic buyers that want to do premium, for example, right?
Or transact on viewability as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, I think another area that we're not hearing too much about, but I feel like is going to be really important in the next year, and I honestly don't understand it very well. Maybe you all can shed some light on it for me. How are we going to take the sort of the gains and the value and the upside that we're yielding from our investments in header bidding into content syndication channels. I'm hearing sort of varying degrees of how well things work in instant articles versus AMP versus Snapchat, Discover, et cetera. Is anybody trying anything? Is anybody, out there on a limb thinking about how this is going to work?
We are thinking about it, and in all honesty, some of the restrictions around some of those relationships at this point have prevented that. I think there are some rich media type provider that have gotten white labeled into these executions that are becoming the primary form of programmatic-like monetization on those platforms without being able to kind of fully extend our programmatic stack or our header bidder stack against them. It's going to create a challenging environment for us to monetize as those audiences. Hopefully they're incremental, unique audiences that we were talking about before versus cannibalizing existing audiences, but we'd love to be able to find a way to put our programmatic stack on those audiences as well, since we kind of can.
Leveraging the investment that you've made.
Exactly. I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the walled gardens that keep those walls up that don't allow us to have that same monetization. And as traffic shifts over, hopefully it's incremental. Right. You want it to be at least on par from a eCPM perspective, right?
Are there any particular channels that appear to be larger and easier, are particularly risky or seem particularly open? AMP, for example, seems like that's the one that's going to be the most easy to leverage the investment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Versus
Versus
instant.
versus Facebook
Got it.
Instant. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, fantastic. So no panel about a potentially overused buzzword would be complete without predictions. So last thing I want to ask everybody before our time's up is give the audience a prediction for us going into next year, a year from now, when we're in our 8th YES event, Yield Executive Summit. Header bidding, dead or alive, or Walking Dead, 10 times as big. Where's this whole thing going for you and your business?
I'll vote alive. I think it's growing the team, growing the technology, looking at the data. It's just changing the way we've run the business traditionally. I think the hurdles of thinking about how we package, how we operate, and how we pull it all together over the next year are going to be what we're thinking about. But I think it's gearing us towards more.
Yeah.
Got it. Alive and kicking.
Yeah, I think she nailed it. It's just to add on to it, it's taking that packaging and taking those insights and kind of evolving it to the next level and working with platforms like yourselves to understand more of those and add that to our operations.
Fantastic. What do you think, Gabriel?
Yeah, I agree. Healthy, exciting, and alive. I agree.
Gotcha. Tim?
Alive and kicking as well. I do think that we will start to see some of our programmatic marketers start to shift into maybe more of a programmatic guaranteed type of opportunity where the programmatic competitive environment's becoming a bit too much, and they've had a year plus now to glean and learn about all of our audiences, and hopefully we can start sharing data in a more meaningful way and start to shift some of those budgets from traditional programmatic private exchange type of relationships into programmatic guaranteed opportunities.
Awesome. So that's a very rosy picture. I was hoping for at least one Walking Dead scenario. I didn't get it. So surprise question, we're going to come back the other way. What's the biggest risk, Tim, that, again, for the people in the audience, what do you think is the thing that we need to think the most about on the risk side managing, over the next year?
I think managing the balance between monetization and your user experience across your platforms, I think is going to become more and more of a need, because as much as we've tried to aggressively go after the header bidder space and monetize our inventory, we've also started to see some shifts in our site and page performance. And for us at USA Today Network, we want to be very mindful of our users and readers' experiences, and that's just it's something that we battle with internally constantly. But one thing we want to make sure stays kind of as pure and clean as it can.
So continued very, very careful management of latency, UX, monetization trade-offs.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Gabriel, what's the doomsday scenario?
Yeah, no, I agree. And maybe more broadly, I think one of the challenges we have is how do we take this and convert it into something that benefits all stakeholders, so it becomes something that adds value in the long run. Publishers, advertisers, users, and try to be transparent about what we're doing at the same time. So I think that's, I would say, our main challenge.
I agree. But then taking it into different formats, I mean, it'll be challenging on the native side. I think we've got a lot of work to do there.
So potentially just a lot of operational overhead trying to take this into new and untested places to continue to leverage that investment.
Sure.
Gotcha. All right. Rachel, what do you think?
I agree with all of these guys, and I would say at the Times it's balancing that, speed, quality with a subscription model, and making sure that we're keeping that balance alive in a good way. So ads, we say something like ads, we're not additive to the experience, but they shouldn't be detrimental to it.
Absolutely.
And so we just need to keep that up.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I learned a ton today. Thank you all so much for talking to us about header bidding. I hope everybody found it as informative as I did. It sounds like it's going to be another pretty good year for header bidding fans. A lot more value to explore, some risks and some challenges that we're going to have to work together to mitigate. But a whole lot more fun between now and, yes, number 8. So thanks, everybody.